All right. So wine's being poured. I think it's been a while since we've been together, 2 whole years, and first time meeting you after trading tweets for the last 2 years. So time to celebrate. Would you lead us in a toast?
Yeah, so just cheers to everybody out there, both in public sector and private sector, who's fighting ransomware. We're making a lot of progress this year, and congratulations on that.
Cheers.
Cheers. You know, I want to show you something. So one of the big challenges that the Chateau in Bordeaux have is fraud. There's a lot of fake wine, especially in China. I know, shocker. And so one of the things that they've had to do is they've had to put these, I'm sorry, I know you all can't see this, but they've had to put these little silver tags on all of the bottles. So Chateau Margaux and some of the other high-end wineries have done this so that you can actually, if you're in China, you can check it with your phone and verify that you're getting a real bottle of Chateau Margaux and not something that is not something that's just presented at that.
Have they considered NFTs? Because I see an opportunity here. Yeah, this is awesome. This is excellent.
One thing at a time. It took them, it took them 100 years to get to the little, to get to the little protection label. They move a little bit slower in Bordeaux than they do in finance. So.
Well, from the girl who gets the cheapest wine on the menu, this is excellent. So
2017 Chateau Margaux is one of those drinkable wines. It's, I know it's almost 5 years, but that's early for Bordeaux, but it's meant to be drunk early and young. And so unlike if you got a 2015, you probably don't want to open that up until 2035 or later. So that's why I figured I'd bring this and something that we can enjoy now.
So Ransomware Sommelier is not just a nickname. You're actually a sommelier.
Right. So this is hopefully PG-13.
For the last panel, all out the window.
I found out very early on in college that wine got me laid a lot more often than beer did. And so I became a wine drinker. And just kind of been that way ever since. And wine is the opposite of everything that we do. Like, it's amazing. I have some friends that own Chateau in Bordeaux, and that's been in their family for 1,000 years. And they literally, you can walk the vines with them, and they're like, this is going in our first wine, and this is going in our second. And I can't tell the difference, but just the knowledge and the closeness to the land they have and the process, it's amazing. I would never want to own a winery because I see how much pain and suffering it is. They've invited me to help harvest a couple times, and I don't want to do that anymore. But I love drinking what they do, and I love the fact that they put all the hard work and effort into it so we can enjoy it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so the first part of your name, ransomware, I've also heard you refer to yourself as the reluctant ransomware analyst. So how does the guy who literally wrote the book on ransomware, his book will be out in the lobby after this, call himself the reluctant ransomware analyst? Where does that come from?
So I got involved in ransomware back in 2014. I worked for a company called Eyesight Partners, and we were acquired by FireEye. And I became a sales engineer for FireEye. At the time, FireEye had released its APT1 report. And so we were going to all of these different companies and talking about, hey, nation state. And they were coming back to me as a sales engineer saying, ransomware. And I'm like, but nation state. But we don't care about that. We care about ransomware. So I got, very involved and was part of a Tiger team at FireEye to help build detections into the platform for different ransomware strains. And I wrote my first book on ransomware back then with a buddy of mine who worked at Symantec. And we wrote the book. We figured, okay, that's it. It's done. And then it wasn't. It's continued to grow and expand and get bigger every year, and change and evolve. And I'd love to be able to talk about all of the new threat actors that are using like DNS over HTTPS, or talk about NTP as an exfil protocol and fun stuff like that. But all anybody ever wants to talk about is ransomware.
No, yeah, no, and I love that phrase, and I'm stealing it liberally. I feel I was a reluctant ransomware analyst for a while too, and then the cases just kept coming. And I think it was around the time that my phone stopped changing ransomware into randomware that I realized, this is my job now. And that was around the same time my phone stopped changing a certain expletive to ducking. Right. And whether those are related, probably. But I feel a lot of people in this room can relate to this reluctant ransomware analyst concept. We have investigators from the public sector, we have compliance officers who are now having to be aware of this. And so just a quick show of hands, like who has either personally or professionally been impacted by ransomware? That's a pretty solid number, and I don't think we would have had the same response 2 years ago doing this. And I think a large part of that is some of the education campaigns that we're seeing come out of government and some of the advisories, which is great because it takes not just a whole of government approach, but a whole of ecosystem. And so for those that raised their hands, and even those that didn't, that are potential reluctant analysts, what do you want them to know about ransomware? What's important for them, be they compliance officers or law enforcement?
Well, so I think that what you said is what's really important, is that the solution to ransomware isn't just let's get better at defending our networks, or it isn't just a law enforcement, or it isn't just a compliance. It's all of those things combined. We have to take a holistic approach to stopping the ransomware problem. Yes, organizations need to build better defenses in, but also we need law enforcement to take action. And and I showed you earlier today, we've seen more law enforcement action this year against ransomware actors and ransomware groups than the previous 5 years combined, and that is having an effect. So if we can continue that pressure along with the financial sanctions and the compliance sanctions that we're seeing, and organizations building up their security, we will get past ransomware. Now, bad guys will go find something else to do. Yes. There's always something, but we can at least make this more expensive for the bad guys to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd love to come back to what we can do collectively to do that. I did want to kind of talk about some of your work historically. I mean, we even called this panel, 2020 was the year of ransomware, in our crypto crime report as well. But in your book, that chronicles kind of some of the history of ransomware. What surprised you as you were going to do this, undertake this effort?
So I think what surprised me is the adaptiveness of ransomware. So if you go back to 2000, I don't know if anybody can see it, but I'm wearing Blockbuster socks today. And many people don't know this, but a big part of the reason that early ransomware was successful was because of Blockbuster video.
Is that right?
And it's got nothing to do with not rewinding or anything. One of the problems with ransomware is you need to be able to pay a ransom in an untraceable currency. And so you had things like Western Union, and you had eCash and so on. But it turns out that one of the best ways to pay ransomware actors very early on is through gift cards. And the reason that gift cards are a thing is because of Blockbuster. So Neiman Marcus came up with the first gift card in the late 1990s, but nobody bought Neiman Marcus gift cards, because if you can shop at Neiman Marcus, you don't use gift cards. However, Blockbuster latched onto the idea, and not only did they latch onto that idea, but they put them at the register. So, hey, get this as a gift for your niece or nephew or whatever. And then from there, Starbucks picked up on the idea, and they became wildly successful in like the early 2000s as Christmas gifts. And somebody got the bright idea, we could take all these stores that are now offering these gift cards and we can put it in grocery stores. And so some of the early ransomware campaigns, if you go back to 2004, 2005, started with trying to do eCash in Western Union, but it was too hard to get people to pay that way. But if you could tell them to go to the grocery store and get an iTunes gift card or a Amazon gift card or whatever, they could kind of read that off to you, and you could get payment that way. Now, that wasn't sustainable in terms of what we see now. You're not going to buy $1 million worth of Amazon gift cards at the grocery store and go pay a ransom that way. But it gave the ransomware actors that idea of, I need an untraceable currency to kind of be able to collect my money and keep my money. And so from there, in 2012, we saw the first ransomware group asking for Bitcoin. And then from there, it's been the evolution of ransomware overall. So we go from land on a single machine, encrypt that single machine, and we're done. Whole internet companies, Microsoft, Google, Yahoo come together and try and squash those phishing campaigns. And then ransomware through SamSam learn, but if I knock out the whole network, not only is that harder to detect by these webmail companies, I can also demand higher ransoms. So they continue to evolve their tactics and techniques as we come up with ways of defending against them.
And I love that story for a couple of reasons. I mean, it's interesting how you said that it was harder to use certain gift cards, and so they stopped using it. Right. I think there's definitely lessons to be learned from that for present day, and it's a question we get a lot about. Is Monero up and coming because of the anonymity capabilities there? And it is harder to use. It's harder to find. It's harder for victims to source. So, and I'm curious in this. Since the first ransomware incident involving Bitcoin in 2012, like what do you feel the role of cryptocurrency is with ransomware's rise? And there's, been certain segments that are pointing fingers at cryptocurrency as the, cause of it. And we heard from the Deputy Treasury Secretary this morning, who plainly felt differently about it. But if just from your perspective and doing a historical look back in cryptocurrency's adoption since 2012, what do you feel its role is?
So you're going to ask me that question in a room full of cryptocurrency fans holding sharp objects.
Liquored up people, yes.
Fantastic.
That's right.
There's a lot of discussion around whether or not ransomware would exist without cryptocurrency. And the answer is yes. We saw ransomware before cryptocurrency was around, and we still, even if you get locker ransomware on your phone, they're going to ask you for gift cards. They're not going to ask you for cryptocurrency to pay for it. What cryptocurrency does enable is it enables the insanely large payments that we're seeing right now. That's one thing, can't be done over gift cards, can't be done over Western Union or eCash or any of those other payment methods. So while cryptocurrency is not inexorably tied to ransomware, it is tied to those large ransom payments, and it does facilitate those large ransom payments.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And we just did a refresh of our data this morning, and last year's totals, which we initially reported in 350 million, are now 530 million is our total for 2020, and we expect that to rise. And we know that's an underestimate. And at the midpoint of this year, we were outpacing last year. So certainly seeing high growth financially. And so the damages financially to these businesses, is more than the ransom payment. It persists long beyond that. But there's also a human cost. And you've been doing this for a long time, and you've been working with victims. I was wondering if you could share some personal stories, to the human effect of these attacks.
Sure. It's funny because every ransomware incident is a little bit different. the ones that I hate the most to walk into are the ones in hospitals, especially rural hospitals where it's not easy to transfer payments or transfer patients and so on. And they also don't have the security staff or the teams to handle an efficient recovery. And those are really, really hard to walk into, especially now because you have so many doctors and nurses and healthcare staff in general that are already overwhelmed and having to go back to pen and paper and having to turn away patients. I've never seen a hospital turn away a critical patient, but what's critical? What is critical? If cancer patients can't get their treatment for a couple of days, that's probably not life-threatening. Otherwise, they'd figure out a way to make it. They'd figure out a way to accommodate them. But it's still painful to kind of have to hear those stories. And so that is, I think that's the hardest for me is, all of the healthcare providers that have been hit especially over the last year with the ransomware.
And for those new to Allan Liska's Academy of Ransomware, this has earned them a title in your, you're well known for what you call ransomware.
Yeah, so I refer to ransomware actors as bastards. I'm pretty sure that's the only reason anybody follows me on Twitter. And I've managed to get that into the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. I could not get it into NPR, they censored it there, but I've tried. But I really don't know what a nice way to say that is. We try and talk analytically when we discuss threat actors. That's why we call them ransomware actors or ransomware groups or whatever. Right. But going after a hospital during a pandemic, you're a bastard, right? I can't think of any. And it's one thing if the ransomware groups weren't specifically talking about wanting to go after hospitals. Like if you landed it accidentally and you say, okay, well, I'm going to give you the key and we're going to back out, you're still a bastard for doing what you're doing. But to know that you're going after healthcare providers and actively looking for them, I can't think of enough bad words for you.
Yeah.
So.
And those parents whose kids had to stay home from school during a pandemic, I don't know if anyone from Maryland is in the house, but for them too, not as serious as a hospital, but granted they were out for blood too.
Right, there's actually an industry term for that. It's called a cyber day now because, we've tracked at Recorded Future 77 ransomware attacks against schools so far this year, and that's impacted about 900 schools. So 77 individual attacks impacting 900 schools and hundreds of thousands of students. And that disrupts learning in an already difficult learning environment. So
absolutely.
But it's not all bad. Just as a quick side note, and I don't recommend this as a security strategy. I had been called in to help with a small rural town that had been hit with ransomware, and they just needed some quick advice. 200 computers in their network. The only 2 that weren't infected by the ransomware were the 2 running Windows 98. The ransomware just wouldn't run on those 2 machines. And again, I'm not suggesting that you migrate all of your systems to Windows 98, but I'm also not suggesting that.
I'll take it up with our VP of security and see what she has to say. And those are serious incidents that we've been going over, but I feel like we are fighting back in some extent. So can you talk a little bit about some of the actions that are taking place? And we've seen, public sector engage, private sector engage, and there's a lot of exciting initiatives out there. I'm wondering if you could talk from any kind of personal involvement that you have with these groups and to their successes.
Yeah, so I was part of the ransomware task force, the non-governmental ransomware task force. They stole our name when they started their governmental ransomware task force. That's fine. We didn't trademark it, so it's okay. It'd be nice if they gave us residuals, but whatever.
Gift cards.
And it was, literally, a bunch of us in the industry going, okay, what can we do? Why are we failing this? Because it's not like we don't know what's needed to stop ransomware. With a few exceptions like the Kaseya ransomware attack, the ransomware actors have the same modus operandi. They get in either through an exploit or through an exposed internet port or a phishing email. They deploy Cobalt Strike, Mimikatz, blah, 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 and they steal files, and then they deploy the ransomware, right? Gain access to the domain controller, deploy ransomware. So we know how to stop it. But why aren't we? Why are so many organizations missing these attacks? And so, we wanted to come together as an industry and figure out what it is and what kind of recommendations that we can make. And I think that's really kind of where you get that first step. And then the government, of course, after the attack on Colonial Pipeline, followed quickly by JBS, even though it had been in talks apparently for a while, they ramped up their ransomware task force. And, President Biden has reached out to countries all around the world to try and collectively take action. And we are seeing this happen. Again, we're seeing more law enforcement action this year than any other year. And it does make a difference. I mean, just in the last couple of days, we've seen REvil and Black Matter publicly say, nope, we're done. We'll see how long that lasts. But the fact that they are worried that somebody's looking over their shoulder is a good thing. And, we've seen a lot of the third and fourth tier ransomware groups decide it's no longer cost effective to run ransomware. And that's kind of what we want to see. Absolutely.
And I was thinking specifically of Nakibi, REvil, and Black Matter. So Black Matter is a rebrand of DarkSide, which is behind the Colonial Pipeline attack, right? And we've seen this and them close shop this week. We were literally calling right before this event, like, oh, got to change the questions because these developments are so quick. But we've also seen, in addition to public sector pressure, private sector involvement in the Black Matter case, which is incredible. The MCSoft cybersecurity team, they were able to obtain the files without paying the ransom, so denying them of that cryptocurrency payment, which is incredible. And we actually see that bear out on our data. We're like, why aren't we don't have great coverage of Black Matter, and the reason is folks weren't paying. We have 25 unused Black Matter addresses, so it's incredible what they were able to do.
Right, and again, that's another example of the industry working together, where we're technically somewhat competitors with Mandiant, and we are somewhat competitors with CrowdStrike, as is NCSoft. But when they come to us and say, "Hey, we have a decryptor. If you have any victims, let us know, and please don't say anything publicly," that's what we do, and we redirect our any victims that we come across to them, keep it all quiet, and try and share that information with the people that need it without it getting out on Twitter and so on and so forth. And to your point, then all of Black Matter's affiliates were mad because they weren't making any money off of the ransomware campaigns. And then the few that were making money, Black Matter was taking forever to pay them. Like, it had been 2 or 3 months since any of them had been paid, which is great for us because we want them to be persona non grata in the ransomware world. We don't want them to come back and rebrand like they did after DarkSide. We want them to, if they come back, people to go, no, we don't trust them. You have the kind of stink of law enforcement on you now, and that's what we want to do to these groups, whether it's either law enforcement's on you, or every time you release a new ransomware, somebody gets the key and we're not going to make any money from you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you hit on an interesting point. It's not just, I don't think that just public-private sector relationships have been strengthened as a result of this counter-ransomware campaign. Internal to private sector. And I've met so many and worked with so many wonderful folks from across private sector as we share information that's critical to being able to identify and disrupt these operations. So Black Matter apparently, is done. Are they gone forever? Are they going to rebrand? How do we prevent that?
It's hard to say. We're pretty sure that REvil is done. because there was so much police activity around them. Like, there are discussions in underground forums, like, I was a Revo affiliate. How do I know that everything I wasn't communicating with them wasn't seen by the cops? And for if any of those affiliates are watching, we saw everything. So you should probably go hide. I mean, and they should legitimately be concerned because, I think one of the things that ransomware actors have benefited from is they felt like because Russia is not going to do anything, because Russia is not going to take action against them, they had immunity. And when it was, the FBI and local government law enforcement, that may have been true. But now you've got this ransomware task force in these 30 countries in this agreement. Now you have intelligence agencies coming and kind of staring at you. And there's not a lot that intelligence agencies can't find when they decide they want to come after you. And I think that is going to be a big difference in this. If we're going to treat ransomware actors the same that we would treat nation-state actors, where, okay, we're going to go find where you live. We're going to go find, and read your emails and, get on your computers and get all your Bitcoin wallets and share them with, researchers like you so we can start tracking this down. That's, I think, what is going to be coming next for a lot of these bigger groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And you notice some of the disarray and discord amongst these affiliates. And what we try to impress upon folks getting into the ransomware space, those reluctant ransomware analysts, is that it's not just about the variant. It's comprised of multiple individuals that supply tools and services that allow these campaigns to continue. So with the takedown of a specific variant, those individuals are still there. All the tools and services that you need, all the recipe to make ransomware is still there. But these are very telling examples of the cost of getting involved.
Right, exactly. So when I was, a decade and a half or so ago, I worked for an intelligence agency, and I used to do training for new operators that were coming in, and the test that I ran on the last day for certification was we had a lab set up, and we had a guy sitting in the middle of the room, and like, this is Bob's network. Go break into Bob's network. And I would let them go for the first half of the day, knowing what tools they had, and then making sure that the system was impenetrable to those tools, and let everybody get frustrated for 3 hours. And then I'd kind of come back and walk up to Bob. I'm like, Bob, here's $100. What's your root password? And say, look, you got to not just think like a hacker. You got to think like you got to think like you have the entire apparatus of the government behind you. And the same thing can be said. Lockbit famously was offering people money for insider threats. Like, they'd say, hey, we will pay you in Bitcoin if you download a file and install it on your corporate network. Well, no reason why the government can't do that to some of these analysts or some of these affiliates and some of these other kind of smaller companies. Government has access to a whole lot of money, and here's $100,000 in Bitcoin, more than you're going to make being an initial access broker. Give me all the details, and they have to start worrying about that now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And now that these ransomware actors do have quite a bit of funds at their disposal, I'm curious your thoughts on what we're likely to see. With increased law enforcement pressure, we've also seen some ransomware actors digging their heels in a little bit, even some declaring war, as it were, on the U.S. government. What do you expect out of these groups? Like, we know it's the scale of attacks is is immense, but it's actually just a handful of groups and individuals that are actually behind it. I mean, the financial data is pretty clear on that too. What do you see in terms of the evolution of the ecosystem?
So I think we're going to wind up with a few big ransomware groups. So I think we're going to have Conti, we're going to have Lockbit, we're going to have Evil Corp, and its many variants. There'll be a few other hangers on, but the smaller ones are going to get either turned up, or they're going to decide it's not worth it. They're not making enough money, and that's going to be bad in the short term. The problem is, again, when you have 30 intelligence agencies now focused on a handful of groups. This time last year, there were probably 10 or 15 different, legitimate ransomware threats out there. We're probably down to a half dozen right now, and that number keeps winnowing away. You don't want to be one of the 3 or 4 that all these different intelligence agencies are looking at. So even if we can't arrest you, or being an American, if we can't launch a drone strike against you. Although, that I think the government should be tracking car sales, because every time they lock one of these dudes up, there's always a fancy car, and there's only so many luxury cars sold in those countries. So if we don't want to launch drone strikes against the actors, drone strikes against their cars would send the same message, and it wouldn't cause the same level of international incidents. But I do think if you have all of the, if you have a fewer groups and you have all of this government apparatus, eventually we're going to be able to shut them down. Again, probably not arrested, probably not get our hands on anybody, but if we can at least stop the activity from happening or slow it down significantly, then I consider that a win. They'll find something else bad to do. That's unfortunate. Everybody will move to business email compromise. I don't know, but we can at least stop this. And 2 years from now, you and I will be talking about how bad business email compromise is and how to stop that.
Bring some wine.
Of course.
And we've seen these actors respond to law enforcement pressure over the last couple of years, too, in terms of how they launder funds. I think a few years ago, there was a wider array of cash-out destinations from the cryptocurrency side. And we've seen that winnow down as they've found exchanges or their accounts frozen or getting questioned by the exchange that they're using. And so we're seeing like the compliant, regulated exchanges, even incident response firms, being more judicious about who they pay, when they pay, and reporting it accordingly. And I think that's had an impact on these groups. And over the last year, the amount of rebrands, renaming. So you've seen a lot of ransomware groups retire or take vacation, but only to come back as another name, just cosmetically change. And I think that's in large part because we are getting the whole community wrapping their arms around this problem. The compliance officers, the incident response firms, and the law enforcement involved. And I think that's continuing to shape how the ecosystem operates and leading them to really just a handful of services at their disposal where they can cash that Bitcoin out.
So I agree with that completely, and you're right. One of the benefits that we've seen because of how much ransomware is in the news is that ransomware isn't a security team problem anymore. It's a company problem. It's an organizational problem. And so that means that the security team is actually talking to the finance team. I can tell you, I've been on lots of security teams. I don't like talking to finance teams or anybody outside of my little world, but it's better when we do. Having those conversations means that we have a better understanding of the true scope, not just the bits and bytes that we as security have to defend against, but what is the overall regulation framework that we're working in? And I think that's really important, and that's one of the things that I really like about this is it's bringing security more into the rest of the organization rather than being kind of out in a wing. And I think that makes it better for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing some of that friction and frustration coming out of these ransomware groups today. While some are digging their heels in, we're also seeing enhanced extortion techniques these days. We were just talking about. Do you want to go through some of the examples you've seen of late?
Yeah, so I have a slide that I do when I do my regular presentation that talks about the extortion ecosystem and how much it's grown. And one of those things they have now is if you call the cops or you call in a ransomware negotiator, we're going to delete all of your files, and we're going to delete your keys, so you'll never be able to get your files back, even if if there are any left that we miss. So that's part of that lashing out. But then, right, they have to do more to extort payment, and I think it's a weird, I don't know what the right word is, a weird irony, maybe, where we think ransomware payments have gone up. Like, well, you're pretty confident ransomware payments have gone up in 2020. I know OFAC released their report earlier this year saying that in the first half of 2021, ransomware payments, the made ransomware payments were more than all of 2020. But I actually do think fewer victims are paying the ransom. I just think there are so many more victims than there were in 2020 that we're still seeing more ransoms paid. But fewer victims are paying, and so the ransomware actors are going to even more aggressive extortion techniques. We saw this with the Allen Independent School District just a few weeks ago, where the ransomware actor emailed all the students and said, hey, or all the parents, excuse me, and said, hey, I have all of your students' personal information, and we're going to publish that on our extortion site because the school refuses to pay. Like, what are you supposed to do if you're a parent in something like that? Yeah. Or we saw it with the ransomware attack on the NRA, where they did an inauthentic Twitter campaign, retweeting all of the researchers that were talking about that to get it more in the news, to make sure that it was a trending topic on Twitter, things like that. So they're going and they're finding new ways to do this, and they have the money to do it. They have the money to rent call center space in India and have those, instead of sending an email, having calls made. We've seen just the FBI just last week released a report saying that they're targeting companies that are engaged in M&A activity. Like, right. You don't want to, we're about to get purchased, you don't want to have a ransomware attack, or you don't want anybody to know you had a ransomware attack, so maybe you'll pay and get out of that. They're going to greater and greater lengths to find ways to get people to pay the ransom. Absolutely,
absolutely. And this is specifically for financially motivated ransomware, which ransomware is by and large a financially motivated crime. But we were talking about something interesting before this panel about the introduction of potentially politically motivated actors into the ransomware space. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, ransomware, despite the fact that it may not seem like it, has always been somewhat, not always, but recently has been somewhat political. Like, none of the Russian-based ransomware actors will target victims in Russia or the CIS countries. So there's that political component to it. But we see this now with China. So we're starting to see a lot of ransomware, not a lot, but we're starting to see some ransomware come out of China. And a lot of the victims in China, out of China, are politically motivated. So we see a lot of companies in Taiwan getting hit by these, by these Chinese ransomware actors. And I want to be clear, just like with Russia, we are pretty confident that these are cyber criminals in China that are launching the ransomware attacks. They just happen to be, but they are targeting countries that are politically of interest, or targets that are of political interest to China. And that is kind of interesting to see. Same thing with some of the ransomware that's coming out of Iran, where again, we think it's cyber criminals, but they're targeting victims that are politically of interest to Iran. So there's this kind of alignment. And often with these types of ransomware campaigns, they're almost more destructive attacks than, like NotPetya was, than they are ransomware attacks where even if you pay the ransom, you may not be able to get your files back.
Yeah, that's wild. And we're certainly tracking some of those Iranian campaigns and those Iranian variants because of the possibility of a sanction violation, right? It's increasingly concerning how it's almost a tool of guerrilla warfare or economic terrorism in some respect, but it also has that same effect of reputational harm that some of the financially motivated actors are trying to amp up a little bit. So what are, as these ransomware variants shut down, what is left for the affiliates to do? I mean, this is their livelihood. That the ransomware ecosystem. Where do they go when a ransomware variant shuts down? How do we prevent them from ramping back up?
So one of my colleagues, Dmitry Chainalysis, grew up in Russia, and one of the observations he made that I think is really a good one is that Russia has one of the best education systems in the world for math and science. So you have all of these really smart people that have these great math and science and computer skills, but no jobs. There's no place for them to go work, unfortunately. And so that's why that sort of cybercrime activity is there. And the problem is that there are lots of other cybercrimes to do. There's carding forums, there's, again, we talked about business email compromise, there are, the banking Trojans, there's all other kinds of cybercrimes. Just right now, none of those cybercrimes pay anywhere near as well as, or as nearly as profitable as ransomware. So there's plenty of other types of cybercrimes that they can engage in if ransomware goes away. It's just they won't make nearly as much money.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can we do in this room, no matter what our role is, to prevent ransomware, impose cost, protect our organizations and our communities?
Well, so I mean, I think that's what we can do as a start is we can do a better job of trying to keep our companies safe. Some of the basic things that people still aren't covering that would help a lot: multi-factor authentication and better asset management, vulnerability management, things like that, things to keep the ransomware actors out of the network. So that's really important. But I do think that there is also, again, we as voters have to encourage our reps to vote for funding that is going to fight ransomware. So, a big target we've talked about are schools. Mm-hmm. Schools can't afford to hire full-time security staff. Mm-hmm. School districts, sometimes the school district will have a security staff that manages all the schools, but those are perpetually underfunded. So, if we could encourage better funding so that schools can, implement better security features, that takes away one avenue of attack for ransomware, for ransomware groups. And then put in proper protections in our own organizations. I think that's really important. And I think really that's kind of what we need to do going forward to try and keep ourselves safe. And the one thing I'll tell you, and I know this is not going to be popular, but for every organization, just disable macros in Microsoft Office documents. I know people in finance love their macros in Excel. Find a different way to do it, because so many ransomware groups use macros as the delivery mechanism. And if we could get that shut down, that would stop so much of the phishing email that comes through. At least make them exploit you. And not just have trick you into opening up an Excel spreadsheet with macros in it.
I thought you were going to say install Windows 98, but I guess that works.
Legitimately, it's funny. I've never been into an organization that it predominantly runs on Macs that's been hit with ransomware, because Macs are a nightmare to manage, manage over the network. So it's really hard for a ransomware actor to infect 1,000 Macs at once. I've had small business come to me, and I'm like, look, man, if you're just getting started, buy all Macs. That's gonna, maybe eventually the ransomware actors will figure that out, but right now they're looking at Linux, they're looking at ESXi, they're looking at everywhere but Macs to infect, because it is such a disaster. The network management part of Macs is such a disaster that it's impossible for ransomware actors to do it. So, again, I know it's super expensive, but if you can convert your organization to all Macs, you're probably fairly safe from a ransomware attack.
Got it. Well, Allan, I think we're about to wrap up. Anything you'd like to leave the audience with before we depart to happy hour?
No, again, just everybody, please keep up the good fight. I appreciate the work that everybody, both public and private sector, is doing here. And I really want to thank you all for inviting me. I really appreciate this. And again, it was really nice to be able to chat in person.
Thanks for being here. Thank you all.
Thank you.